medicine, such as the government and politics, entertainment, mass media, law. All of those types of characteristics that make up the society, Higginbotham would suggest, was ingrained in a very racist way toward African Americans and other ethnic groups in America, and that it still persists as we think about how culture is defined as something that is passed down from one generation to the next generation to the present time here in 2016 and ahead. Now, Alex de Tocqueville, a great French philosopher, came to America maybe 150 years or so after 1619. And what he found as he was traveling in horse and buggy throughout the South, these people of African descent that were enslaved. And as he looked at the very foundations of society, he said there's no way America could ever reach a democracy. Why? Because it was founded on slavery. So therefore, when we think in terms of it being so ingrained in our society, in order for us to make improvements on it, we must just understand that that's how this particular country and society was founded. Now, many people listening would say there's plenty of evidence that race relations has changed, and they're absolutely correct. You and I can remember when school segregation was very prevalent here in the United States. Some people might be able to look at a little age difference between us, but I was in a segregated type of a situation through the 8th grade. Many of the viewing audience might remember that. So the segregation took place, so we can see how there were certain improvements. We can look back at 244 years of enslavement in 1861 to 1865 with the Civil War, and after it ended, there was the Emancipation Proclamation. So 13th Amendment freed the slaves, the 14th Amendment, they gave a citizenship right, and the 15th Amendment gave the right to vote. Now, when we talk about Higginbotham's piece on it being so ingrained in the fabric, we're talking about 1866, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1865 was making the comment that people still do not have the fundamental right to vote in America. That's 100 years after the voting rights was given to slaves that were freed. So that's that notion of that. So we can see other possible improvements in race relations in America. The segregation is mentioned. We can see that we can drive any place from the East Coast to the West Coast, and if you want to get a place to live in, public accommodations are certainly free. You can speak and do anything that you want to, go into any store that you want to. We can even go as far as say now we actually have an African American president, and we can see representatives on the Supreme Court, since that's such a topical issue. So there have been improvements. However, as we look at those improvements, we can also look at these disparities that I mentioned from my postdoc training through my PhD that are still very present, such as incarceration rates that you and I have talked about on the show many a times. Those disparities, if you look at Dr. McIntosh's piece, after slavery, that so many people of African descent were incarcerated and then sold out or given out to owners to make money. Presently, when you look at the incarceration rate, you still see a large amount and the highest percentage of African American males that are in prison. When you look back at an earlier time period in our history, you can see that people were fundamentally lynched and killed. Well, today you say, well, how does race is so much a part and ingrained in the very fabric?
Good.
When you see someone that may in that institution may have broken the law and someone is shot, that in the subconscious of that person, they still might shoot a person 14, 15 more times. Now, if you just think about, if you go hunting and if you shoot a deer or any animal, you might shoot them one time, it's a good shot, it's done. You don't think about shooting them 15 more times. So we can see how something within the subconscious really is still present within our society as an indicator. So in sociology, we have to have a very clear definition of race. And race is fundamentally defined as viewing someone's attitudes and beliefs of someone's physical characteristics, such as skin pigmentation, hair texture, those things that are just obvious, and a notion of inferior and superior ideas about those physical characteristics. Now again, how is that so ingrained from an earlier period and still very present within our culture today? Everything from commercials to what we see in mass media, and that doesn't mean that there haven't been many improvements made, but that's how race is fundamentally seen. Now, I'll be remiss to say how sociologists and anthropologists and other social sciences has indicated to us in the literature that race has really been not so characteristics on how it's been defined and placed in our American culture, but it's a social construct. Now, what does it mean by being a social construct? That means that historically, people have placed people into categories that really don't have any real meaning at all, such as Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. And from that present quasi type of experiments that were done, people still have those feelings today through theory, and noted some of our primary sociologists and other social sciences out there have kind of instigated a racist type of theoretical framework that fits the social structure of America. But it's erroneous. We are much more human than the other types of characteristics such as hair texture, skin pigmentation. Let me give one real quick example of how if someone is from Australia and if their DNA or their blood type matches someone in an Igbo tribe of Africa, it can be used. If there's a physical part in a human being that now in our postmodernist technological stage of living that can be transferred for someone else's parts, it can be done. So we are much more alike than we are different. But however, here in the United States, from slavery to right now, it was socially constructed that there are these differences. And that's why I started the conversation off by it becomes so ingrained in our culture that we are forced to check certain items and to say that we are of this category or the next category, and we have to question to what degree does it have real meaning or just erroneous meaning.
And so what we'll do, Doctor, is to take this second commercial break, and then we'll come back and sort of round this up for the day. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
This notion of, I might cite somebody, Dr. Leary. We've talked about this before about post-traumatic slave syndrome and those types of things.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yeah.
I don't think I've
you never heard of that concept? Yeah, just like post-traumatic stress. You know, you have somebody that goes away. They just stay over there. They do 1 or 2 tours, right? So you're talking about somebody been in hundreds of years of slavery. So why can't that type of stress be passed down? They just go there for 6 weeks and come back there all messed up.
That's right. And we've been through it for life.
That's right. They take an elephant, they take them out the jungle, put them in a circus and keep them there. They wonder why they go crazy every once in a while, running on, and they think that we shouldn't have that.
Okay, well, that's good.
I'm gonna throw a little bit of that in there.
That's excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's excellent. Sociology of race. That's excellent. I'm glad we did this. It makes sense. You've got so much information. Just all that information.
Yeah. How do you coin it down to like segments? You need to go on and on about it. You know how we go. We go for 2 or 3 hours.
Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's given us a sociological understanding of race in the United States of America. Doctor, during this last segment, let's see if we can further elaborate upon some of the things that you've already given us dealing with race in America, and give us any kind of example that you think might further sort of enhance our knowledge in reference to what we're doing here today.
Okay, and as we said, race is a complex issue, so much so that sociologists look at overt and covert type of racism that exists within the society. Overt is the traditional one that people might say, yeah, it's so obvious that you've lynched someone or you've done some other items out there that's just so glaring. During the civil rights movement, when dogs and water holes, it's just glaringly. Covert is that type of a racism that when you go in and want to make a purchase, and the interest rates happens to be a lot more higher for one group of people than another group. That brings us into the conversation that when we really want to make an intervening inroads to racism in America, that we have to understand some of the basic key terms, and everyone has to understand them. For one, we have to understand dominant group and subordinate group. That given our country and its unfolding from 1619 to 2016, that there is a dominant culture within the social structure, within family, within economics, within medicine, within law, within the government, within mass media, communication, entertainment. All of those institutions that are here in America were defined by the dominant group. Now, I know we've been talking about African Americans, but it's assumed that all other ethnic groups that come in with different cultures and languages and backgrounds have to assimilate, which is a process of understanding your own culture, but then learning all of the dominant culture's values and norms. And that's what happens within American society, and we've all done that. One of the major institutions, such as education, from first grade through high school, and then from there through higher education, has a tendency to do that. We're supposed to assimilate, which people have done. But what happens in many instances that people do not understand racism part and discrimination part, which is looking at another person based on those alleged or real physical characteristics and then acting toward that person in a certain way. And when they do that consciously or unconsciously, it happens to be racism. Racism. Yes. Now, another term that we have to understand, in addition to dominant group, subordinate group, is that of prejudice. Prejudice is a negative attitude or belief that one has a tendency to generalize about that other group. And they do that because of the type of culture and society that we've grown up in. And sometimes it's very unconscious. For instance, we all know about the disparities that have happened with police officers killing African Americans. I bet if we had a conversation with that police officer, he would say, some of my best friends are African American, we play basketball together, we have cookouts together. And mean it too. Yeah, and mean it too. But they do not understand that this thing that we are talking about today is in the subconscious. So when they get there and feel empowered and see this other person, something that's been so ingrained has a tendency to come out at that particular point in time. That's why it's very important to understand how this is so ingrained in the American ethos, in the American culture, to the point that if we don't understand the terms, then we will not understand how it's so overgeneralized. And another one that I must say very quickly is that of stereotypes. Yes. So since prejudice is a negative attitude or belief that's generalized about a particular group, a stereotype is the over generalization toward another group. So you can have a group of people that are in a homogeneous area, meaning all by themselves, as all one group, one ethnic group, say European Americans that live in a certain rich area or live in a place like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, as we're seeing today in our presidential debate that's going on. And they might have this overgeneralization about, say, having an African American president that in their subconscious make them feel, well, hey, that's enough. And that we're going to not vote and help or be an assistance way to something that's supposed to be better for everyone else in America. So that's an overgeneralization, a stereotype that you have about a person before they even show up. And so these terms are very important. Now, Dr. Leary would ask a group of people, this is to try to share, if you had a group of African Americans in the audience, let's say 400 or 500, and if you would ask the question, can African Americans or other ethnic groups be racist toward other African Americans? Social scientifically, we would say no. Why? Because race and racism is empowerment, is power. Do you own the very economics that you can then make a negative prejudice attitude towards someone or overgeneralize about them and give them mistreatment or be discriminatory? In many instances, we must make a distinction between that African Americans can be prejudiced toward each other, or another ethnic group might be prejudiced, but they cannot be racist toward another group. So that's why I'm trying to indicate today in our discussion that it's very important to understand the definition and difference between racism and prejudice. Racism is that negative attitude and belief that one is superior or inferior based on those physical characteristics, and as a result of that, you would have a stereotype or overgeneralization toward that person before you even get to know them. Prejudice
Racism sees only the outside.
Yes.
And prejudice looks deeper on the inside. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, that would be. So everyone can be that way, but then one is when you act upon the other. Now, what's the sociological point? By us understanding that, you might say that I have never been around, and Dr. Gordon Allport would suggest, as you have just said, if you get to know the other group, then your prejudice starts to reduce because you start having a better insight about the other group if you've experienced what they have experienced, either educationally, that's why we fight for diversity in higher education, or going into that particular area. For instance, I was oblivious to homelessness, so I had to live among the homeless and do my dissertation to know more about them. So if you are a part of that dominant group, you must get to know those that are in the subordinate group and understand their culture. And by understanding it, then you can at least make a very good and objective decision about what you are doing. And I think that helps us have a brighter tomorrow here in American society. But our flaw is this. From 244 years of enslavement, 81 years of Jim Crow laws, America has been in denial about that. If you look at the comparison with South Africa, they will say very clearly, we did the same thing, but we were wrong. We did wrong. We were racist toward people. We discriminated against them. We want to apologize. We want to go out now and try to have a better democracy for everyone. And so you can see that they are much more advanced. Now, President William Clinton made an effort to have a national debate on race and racism, had excellent scholars, Dr. James Jones, Dr. Jack DeBidio, and many others who headed that up. And they tried to have this national conversation, and it kind of died down. But that's one of our flaws in America, but we have to be able to understand the terms in a correct way. We can't have misunderstanding about the terms in race because it is so complex, it is so embedded. Now, when you move into the Generation X and the millennials, this is what we were talking about when we say about race, how it's socially constructed. And with so many changes that are positive, people have a false sense of reality that is not present. And therefore, with some of the fundamental things that people need to be concentrating on, even that particular group that's being racist toward don't even believe it's in existence. So it gets very complicated and it's very complex. So therefore, we have to understand these terms and understand that these disparities based on race are in any place in health and wellness. Still, African Americans are disproportionate with all of the chronic illnesses today. When you think about income inequality, still the least paid and the least type of socioeconomic status and where people are living and the quality of life. So these disparities are very much present within our society and culture.
And so in a real sense, Doctor, it appears that there will always be race.
Yes.
And within the context that we've all talked about it, things might get better, but nevertheless, there's that subconscious that folks have in reference to race that often comes forth in spite of whoever they are or wherever they are. Would that be a correct assessment?
That's a very good assessment.
As a matter of fact, we're going to have to stop and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.